challenges of integrating user experience design into an Agile practice. I want to see everybody. Just I'd like to see where people are coming from. Who here has worked on a project where, on an Agile project where there was a really strong user experience component, maybe user experience design was on the critical path? Okay. And about half of you. And of you, how many of you would say that was, it's been great, you'd love to do an Agile project again if there was a strong UX component? About half of those people, I'd say. How many people thought it was really terrible? You really don't want to do Agile again as a UX designer or with a UX designer? Okay, so no horror stories here. Okay, cool. I have heard horror stories. Just a little bit about me. I've been in the software industry since 1996, and my title has changed according to the what's in fashion for what they call designers. We didn't even really have a name until about the early 2000s, and the name at that time was interaction designer. And nowadays, user experience designer or the mysterious UX UI designer is more in vogue. So I'm sure some of you have teams where you have a dedicated design specialist, and some of you probably are working where you don't have a dedicated UI design specialist, but somebody has to do it. So my talk today is going to be for both of those situations. As long as there's, you're going to have the same issues either way. So I'm hoping that this will be a participatory session. I should say that I'm a practitioner, not when it comes to Agile and UX and the intersection between them, I'm a practitioner, not in any way a guru about that. So I'm hoping that we will learn from each other's experiences and each other's questions. So as we're going along, if you have a story to tell or a question to ask, please just jump in. So I'd like to start with an example to illustrate just the concept of user-centered design and what we mean by user-centered design. So some of you have iPhones, and you might be familiar with this icon at the edge of the lock screen, if you have an iPhone. Anyone? A few heads nodding? Okay. So what this button does is you swipe it and it turns your phone into a camera. Okay? And the reason I bring this up as an example of design is not because it's the most valuable design thing that I can think of. There's a lot more decisions that designers have made that are more valuable. But it's a really good example of user-centered design, because by other definitions of what good design is, you might think that this is actually really strange design, or you might think that it's actually bad design. So I'll walk you through how you might go about thinking about it. So if you were to, for example, to think about designing the user experience of a phone purely in terms of functions and permissions, okay, and a lot of software is, especially enterprise software, ends up being designed around a permissions model. You might say, well, why is there just one button that you can, one app that you can launch without unlocking your phone? Because the security issues with taking a picture are equivalent to the security issues with recording a voice memo. Okay, why is it that I can't record a voice memo without unlocking my phone? Why is it that I can't create a note or turn on my flashlight without unlocking my phone? So why one icon? Why not 5? Or if you were looking at it from the point of view of pure minimalism, which is also another way that people kind of define good design, less is more, okay? Then you might say there should be no icon on this home screen. You should, it's just a total pain in the butt to deal with an app that you can access when you're logged in, and when you're not logged in, you have to deal with different logic. It means it's more code, there's more to explain. There's lots of reasons why you shouldn't have this, okay? If you're looking at this problem from the point of view of the user, that's when it starts to make sense. And that's when you start to have answers to these questions of why this, why not that. Because the reason that you've got one and only one button on the home screen is because you're out walking, iPhone users are out walking in the park and they see this amazing, beautiful bird that, they want to take a picture of. And when you take out your phone, you want to just get a picture of the bird. You don't want to be putting in your passcode and finding the camera icon on your home screen and launching an app. It takes too much time, and there's an urgency to that context of use that isn't there for other tasks. So depending on whether you take a user-centered design view or a different design view, you could consider this to be good or bad. And user-centered design is very empirical. It means simply asking what does the user expect, what's going to make life simpler for the user. Okay. So I'm going to bring up a quote from kind of a household name in the user-centered design field, Jakob Nielsen. And he is generally pro-Agile, to put this into perspective. Let's see what he has to say about the intersection between Agile and user experience. So this comment is based on his experience consulting to a lot of companies who are doing exactly what we're trying to do, bring user-centered design practices into an Agile environment. And what he's not saying here is he's not saying that Agile is bad. Okay, he's on balance very positive about Agile for user-centered design. So what he's saying here is that if Agile is the only input into your software development philosophy, you'll be missing out on a lot of the tasks and activities that are necessary for making a great product for users. So the perspective that's reflected here is that you need to augment Agile to get the right product, and that's what we'll be looking at today. So we'll be looking today at 4 challenges, and let's just jump in and start with the first one. So challenge number 1 is when to design. Okay, and I'm going to talk about 2 different common approaches. One is what I'd call, for lack of a better word, a textbook approach, and another is what's known as the parallel track approach. So before I get into this, I just want to bring up some terminology where the UX world and the Agile world use the same term in different ways. Iteration for designers means sketching things out so you can throw them away and come up with another iteration that's better. Okay, so an iteration is something that you create rapidly and cheaply, and then build on, to redo your design over and over. You're going to solve the same design problem many, many times usually before you consider it done. So the iteration to a designer is different from the 2 to 3 week long iteration that we're used to thinking of in Agile. Another term, UI specification. When I use the term UI specification, I'm meaning something that communicates how a design is going to work. It's often very lightweight. We're not talking about a tone. Okay, so in Agile we tend to say we don't like specifications, but we do need to communicate design somehow. So I'm just going to use the term UI specification for whatever deliverable it is that communicates what design is. So let's look at this textbook approach. And if Agile is the only input into your software development methodology, it's quite likely that you're going to be doing something like this, where you've got everybody working on the same stories at the same time, including whoever's doing your design work, and you have very little or no upfront design time. Okay, has anyone worked on projects like that? A few people. And so, how did it go?
Lots of overtime.
Lots of overtime. Okay. Okay. I'll talk about some of the things that go wrong with it. So this is what you might do if you haven't been taught anything different. So the first problem that designers will complain about is that you've got a really compressed time period for user-centered research and design activities. Okay. Designers want to get to know users and their tasks. They want to be able to get into the user's head. They want to do things like comparative and competitive analysis to get ideas on how to solve the design problem. They want to look at, the complaints that you've had about your product in the past, or look at the analytics. They want some context to what they're designing. And so they need time to do that, okay? And designers also need time to design, to go through those iterations. It's just a fact that when, there's often many possible user interface solutions to a given set of requirements. And the first thing that you come up with, the first idea that you come up with, is never the best idea. You always just put something down on paper to throw it away, and it gets better when you spend more time on it. So, and that iterative activity and building things to throw them away is one of the ways that a designer adds value, because it's better to do that than to build it in code and have people be unhappy. Yes?
So think about the project managers coming in. You're talking about iterating through the design.
Iterating through the design, yeah.
So why are you doing that crazy stuff? Just get it right the first time, or we don't have time for that, or what the heck do you think you're doing? So for the project manager that doesn't understand, how do you help make them understand?
I think you have to, that's a really good question. How do you make them understand?
Can I try to answer?
Yes, please, yes.
I used to work at Blackberry years ago as a project manager with people in that role. And my experience was that it was a collaborative discussion about how much time, right? Like how much time are you going to approach on this? For example, I sat behind an art director one time, and at 8 or 9 a.m., whenever I saw him sit down, and he played with it for the rest of the day. And for project managers, I was like, what are you doing? Right? And it was like, he was working on the design. But the agreement was, he was going to spend the day working on that design. So as the project manager, I didn't challenge him or anything. It probably was better. But I would just say it's more of a collaboration, communication to work between the two of you to understand how much time.
So on that vein, you make that agreement, you spend X amount of time, wherever the design is at that point, you have to cut.
Well, yeah, if it's going horribly, well, let's change it around. What if they're doing design and software development, right? I often refer to it is experimentation and using her definition of iterations in software development, and you learn and you change and you adapt, right? How long does someone get to spend on a particular function or thing, right? There is an agreement on how much time, and if things go bad, it's a learning experience, and you pivot, you learn from there, right? So anyways. Back to you.
Okay, I've thought of an answer, which is what I would do is, the first design that looks decent, that's often like halfway through. When I have a design that kind of looks decent, kind of hangs together as a straw man, I'm usually about halfway through my allotted design time, and then I put it out there. And what happens is that people will complain about it, like you realize that there's issues, and then it's a matter of, okay, yeah, we do need to fix these issues. Whose job is it to fix them? It's mine. So. And I think people learn from experience that, spending more time on it can, spending the right amount of time on it leads to better results. Good question, yeah. So anyway, yes, this going rapidly iterating instead of, coding it and then finding it's a problem is a valid, yes.
Yeah, one thing that might be missing from the discussion we had so far is that working a whole day on the design in isolation is different than working on it in collaboration with other people.
Yes.
To me, the question, I'm a project manager too, Agile project manager. So the question to me is, how long should a person be working on it in isolation before they solicit the feedback of the rest of the team?
Yeah.
That's a real issue.
That is the real issue, yeah. Just to throw out an opinion, I think that you should be exposing your design surfacing it as soon as possible. That's the way that I like to work. Alternatives? Okay, so that's just one problem. this compression is just one problem. This quote is from a case study on UX and Agile, and this is from a manager at Citrix. I'm just going to let you read that. Is this something that resonates? Yeah? Okay. So this is another big problem with kind of this textbook approach, which is that to support a given user story, you could solve it in different ways, And the cheapest one, or the one that comes to mind for the developer when they're estimating, isn't always the best one or the one that makes the most business sense, okay? And this is just kind of maddening, but every experienced designer has seen this, which is that you estimate before you design, and then you create those timelines based on those estimates, and then when the designer comes up with a better solution, you can't even consider doing that designer's, implementing that designer's, more expensive solution because you've already committed to a timeline, okay? And then either the design is ignored or the design is asked to refactor it into something cheaper, which, the designer's not happy with that, or, developers put in overtime and the team gets unhappy. So what this kind of calls for is a process or a schedule in which you're designing, and then there's a time to consider and estimate based on that designer, based on the design, and based on the value of that design before you commit to a schedule. So those are the two big issues that I see with kind of the textbook approach to Agile. So what's the alternative? So this is actually a really widely accepted kind of best practice. This isn't just an idea, it's actually a pretty well-proven idea. And the idea is you have the designer work ahead, often along with your business analyst working ahead. You give them a good lead time of 3-6 weeks or something like that. Not a huge amount, like no one's advocating designing everything up front, but to give them 1 or 2 sprints of lead time. And this gives the designer more time to do quality work, and it makes it possible for the team to plan development sprints based on how much effort it will take to implement a great user experience instead of just meeting the letter of the user's story. Now, who here has worked with this kind of approach? Yeah? And would you do it again? Yeah? Yeah? Okay. So this is widely practiced. There's a risk to this as well, which is that you can end up having kind of a mini waterfall designer working in isolation process, and that tends to happen more when the designers work on a different set of stories than the developers. So you really kind of have to be disciplined, not just in the designer support, but also the developers have to take time off their implementation stuff to work with the designer. You need to have that communication, make sure that communication is happening. So just to give you an example, okay, of what the designer might be spending their time on. So if I've got 3 weeks to design something, approximately, most of the time, about halfway through, I'm going to try to bring something to the team, okay? And you're going to be talking with the developers all the way through, okay? So developers have to have time allotted for that. So aim for a design walkthrough about halfway through, and then probably usually takes another 2 meetings. Usually takes about 3 touch points just with your team in order to get a design done and accepted, okay? When you've got something that works for the designer, you're about halfway through. And a variation on this, parallel track approach is something that I think, I really like this idea, and I think this is how it works probably most often in practice anyway, which is you start the design, ahead of time, 1 sprint ahead, but you aim to complete the design in the iteration in which it's going to be implemented, okay? And that just gives you more collaborative, more experimenting time with the developer, and more time for the developer to kind of raise issues with how things are being implemented. The danger here, of course, is that you're going to be spending a lot of time here, and you're going to lose the lead time that you started off with. Okay. Any questions or comments on this when to design idea? Is really the big issue one of them. Yeah.
Just one. I guess one.
Yeah.
It's been a while since I worked, about 5 years since I've been at Las Radius, but I can't remember if we ever did like design guides before, for so you kind of get the general themes and whatnot ahead of time before you actually get to say, Like, it seems to me like you're talking about, say, a design for a particular page, like a web page or something like that, like in your examples here of lead time. So, have you experimented or tried having more of the overall sort of design thinking and a design guide or something up front? A lot, going there first a bit, so that you're not necessarily, doing piecemeal design. You have that more holistic view of your design.
And we're going to get into that.
Oh, okay.
Going into that right now. I should mention that although I did used to work for Blast Radius, I was in the software division of Blast Radius, so my background's actually much more in software than in websites. So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Oh, different.
Yeah. And I think the answer to that question is probably kind of different for software versus websites, the amount of planning they have to do. So I'm going to, yes, cohesive design. So this is this challenge of design quality, creating something with unity, is not so immediate as the wedge design problem, but it's a harder problem to solve. It's probably the hardest problem to solve in Agile for designers. And I'm going to show a quote next from Dave Malouf, who is a founder of the Interaction Design Association, and he's a leader of the user experience community. And he does not like Agile. So here's what he has to say. Okay. So yes, not a fan of Agile. And what he's saying is that he's saying that truly groundbreaking, amazing, cohesive design, really great idea, a big idea, okay, could not have been done in Agile. And of course, we in this room are going to continue to do Agile. And probably most of us are not going to try to do something as ambitious as that. Okay. But it raises the question. So historically, Agile started on internal development projects, and the focus has always been, not a lot of focus on user needs, not a lot of focus on innovating in user experience. And since then, it's really been continued to be a very developer-focused, really about expediency kind of culture. So the question is, how much do we need to tweak textbook Agile processes in order to make really great design happen? So the idea of parallel track, letting the designer think ahead, that's definitely one of the things that's important, that will help. There are a few other things I can suggest just in terms of how to slice and dice the work that the designer's going to do. There you go.
Can I ask a question? Sorry, I see you've done all the talking today.
I'm glad you do. I'm glad you're here.
Can you back up to the previous slide?
Yeah, sure.
This may be just rhetorical. Why not? Why couldn't it be done Agile? Like, I appreciate that they're saying that Agile is like 2 pages on a website, right? Some principles of manifesto. Like, well, why not? What is it about Agile that couldn't have produced that kind of design and thinking? I don't necessarily think you can't read Dave's mind, but so far as I'm reading these things, I have to ask the question: what misunderstanding of Agile do they have such that they believe this is the future? Because I don't believe this is the case. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but I'm really curious. Why not? What is it about Agile that they think they couldn't have done with the iPhone?
Yeah, I'd say that the implementation of it could be done in Agile, but to expect designers to come up with such an interlocking set of ideas, new ideas that all have to work together really well, and to do that, thinking about a little bit of the problem, one little piece of the problem for 2 or 3 weeks at a time. That's what he's saying can't be done. You need someone to look at, a big set of problems for more than 3 weeks.
But more than 3. Agile doesn't say anything about 2 or 3 weeks.
It does say that you need to break things up into, and deliver frequently. And it does say that working software is the primary measure of progress,
Right.
which some people take to mean that it's the only measure of progress. That's a problem. Yeah. I mean, I totally agree with you that it's, I don't think you have to tweak Agile that much, but I think you do need to tweak, kind of the textbook way that people interpret it.
Right. I would say seeing the end product is the primary measure of, it's like actually seeing something versus actually working software as often. So I've implemented Agile marketing teams and stuff like that. Right? So it's not always just about software, but anyways, I'll stop bugging you. Thank you.
Yeah, there was something back there.
For me, this kind of reads as to get something completely brand new, you need more research done, which Agile, for me, I feel like it's using something you already know to create, and just repurpose it.
Yeah, and that's the kind of project where it does work really well.
Yeah, so this, I'm thinking of creating, you create eye tracking, you create the heat map where people are looking on the screen, and I don't know if that can be achieved, that kind of research can be achieved through Agile, or you need a larger process. That's what that kind of needs to be.
That means to you that you could do, sorry, how does it relate to eye tracking?
Need more research to actually
More research?
understand some new facts that maybe no one knows.
Yeah, there's a fact finding that takes more than 3 weeks at a time, and there's also just thought, and playing. I think that the kind of process and the kind of culture that leads to innovation, there needs to be some time to play for people to play, and for people to not just be working towards a really fixed, deliver something in 3 weeks.
I think what you say that there needs more time to play, how they should play that eventually from, I think, quick through learnability. And that's most of the time is very interesting because this is a pie in the sky, right? But actually, the problem occurs when you developers are developing, implement that thing, and then you really have the device in your hand. So really trying to use it, and you say, oh, there's a problem. So you may say like Agile, piece like a piece of that, but it doesn't feel actually have something that you actually can try. Then you test the design. So what you say like an iteration, you define as what the iteration you answer. You actually say what is the end of the iteration, how they should test the design. It's a quick 1 hour, they will get to that. Actually, if you look for very consistent and at scale, you don't know until they actually implement. So I think if designers are programmers, they can put some real something that works like on a surface, then they will be able to test the design, and then there will be problems with in the development time. We can give them like 3 weeks ahead of time, but actually have them fine. But the problem is that they actually haven't tried to do these that we will with the system. They try to do big versions. That's the problem. The actual feedback comes only from development. That's the problem. No matter waterfall or Agile, I think it really doesn't really work.
Yeah, for many projects, there's feedback that you can get from a mock-up, from a prototype, and then there's a whole other layer of feedback that you can only get from people working with actual data. Yeah, that's a good point. Yes.
I think one of the things that practically if you look at any project, there's not going to be any funding for a project without a proper vision.
Yeah.
Be some ideas for what the team is.
Yes. Yeah.
Nobody's going to put together a vision and say, oh, that vision is this.
Yeah.
So I think he's not right. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't understand.
Yeah.
But this is not what that we need.
Yeah.
Some has a vision. So it could be a customer, it could be a product owner, it could be a some has a vision. That's why there's money on the table. That's what it needs.
Yeah.
So I think vision is enough.
Yeah. He's a minority point of view, I'd say. Most people in the design community aren't fighting Agile quite as vigorously as he is. Yeah.
So what system did they use?
I don't know. And I don't know if it's public knowledge. Okay.
You could practice Steve Jobs having to do it over and over and over.
Am I able to pass the mic around?
Yeah. Who is wanting
Thank you, Rob.
the mic?
Thank you. Back there.
No. Next question.
Okay, next question? Anyone else? Yes.
Okay, it seems like the logical foundation that we have is that thought and vision is mutually exclusive with expediency, which totally sounds like false to me, because a person, anybody can have thought and vision as well as being expedient. So that statement is kind of logically flawed.
You think that if you want thought and vision and expediency, you could just choose to have them all?
That's what some great people have that succeed with great things like Steve Jobs. He had thought and vision, and he expediently produced a product and sent it to market. It seems like he's saying that such person doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Which,
well, I'm saying that it's a question. What he's talking about is priorities. Yeah. Okay. So this is a philosophical discussion that I could go on for a long time.
Susan, create a panel.
Sorry.
I was going to say, I think this is a perfect first question for the panel. The merits of designing Steve Jobs' way.
Yes. Good one. So just in terms of how to slice and dice design effort, ways to get kind of more cohesion out of the budget that you have, out of the people that you have. What can help, I think, is okay. So the textbook approach is you write a user story, you have it designed, have someone produce a design for it, and then you implement that user story. That's what we think is going on in Agile. And sometimes we relate the user story to an epic. Okay. What I've seen though is that although you can focus on implementing one user story at a time, just think about that user story in the context of an epic. What a designer needs to do, a user experience designer, is look at all of the user stories, all of the tasks that the user has to, that the product has to support, everything. The designer has to keep all of that stuff in their heads. They have to, they're more thinking of, okay, on this screen, 50 tasks can go on. Which is the most important one? What's the primary one? What do we have to highlight? What buttons need to not be close to each other because one of them is the one people should click on most of the time and the other one's damaging. So designers need to think about more than one user story at a time. So instead of what I suggest is instead of just thinking about what user stories the developers are going to want to be working on 6 weeks from now and giving that to the designer. What should happen instead is have a conversation with the designer and say, okay, what user stories make sense to you, and have that be more of an exchange. So, and to just give some idea of what this will result in. You're probably looking at one user story, one chunk of work for a designer is going to turn into many user stories for a developer. And that's what you would expect. Your ratio of developers to designers is probably something like 5 to 1 or 10 to 1. Okay? Make sense so far? Okay. Another thing I'd recommend is don't try to constrain design to what you can implement in one sprint. So if you have one way to kind of seriously damage your designer's productivity is to try to get them to whittle down their design according to what developers can code in a given time frame. What happens then is the designer and everyone else spends all their time kind of negotiating and about how to do that right sizing. Okay, and you want your designer to spend time designing. So let your designer think ahead. Let them think about what will be implemented in multiple iterations, to get to your end product, your vision, where you want to be. And whatever design specification you have, you can use metadata. Just show you an example of that. Future, nice to have, that kind of thing. Details to be worked out later. To say, what are we implementing now? What are we implementing in this imminent sprint versus what are we going to prioritize in a future sprint? And then you'll have your user stories, written to reference, your design deliverable, whatever form that takes. and your acceptance criteria will generally reference that. Okay. Another practice that can help with this cohesiveness problem is to think about organizing sprints by fidelity. Okay, this is low fidelity design. This is high fidelity design with a lot of details put into it. Most designers, I'm not sure about most designers, but many designers, especially if they're working on a new product or a major revision to an existing product, want to get that big picture, want to figure out how everything's going to work together first. And that means that they don't have the bandwidth to think about details early on. Okay? And as it happens in an agile environment, often you work out details as you go along. Okay? So try to have the designer focus on that big picture in the early iterations, even if they can't do all of it up front. So designers usually like to work this way, working with low fidelity first and trying to, and your early deliverables might just be early fidelity. It's usually the rest of the team that has a problem with it, okay? Because it's really uncomfortable, especially for, just from what I've seen, for QA and for documentation, to not know what the product's going to look like and to not know what the definition of a bug is because the spec isn't telling them that. Okay? So it challenges the team to tolerate ambiguity and to tolerate things changing. So there's a few things that you can do to deal with the fact that your designer hasn't spec'd out everything. A lot of this is just pretty common stuff that you'll do with Agile. I used to be a tech writer, so a lot of this documentation stuff is something I'm very intimate with. You can get a lot of pushback from the team, but I'd argue that in some ways it's actually healthy, because if you're thinking about things, if all that you know about the product is how it's going to work at a high level and what it's going to be, what the users are going to do with it, that's actually more valuable and more important to focus on and test and document at that, at that deep level than testing and documenting the superficial details of the user interface. Okay, so as a tech writer, for example, documentation doesn't fail because the screenshot is a little bit off. Documentation fails because it doesn't address the tasks that the user, the tasks that the user has, the questions that the user has, or the vocabulary that the user has. But those are the kinds of issues that you do work out early on in a low fidelity to high fidelity design process. So that's another option for slicing and dicing your design work. Sprint 0 might not be enough time to create one design vision that's going to work forever. You might need to have a spike or a mid-project sprint. Some companies formalize this and do this, in a year-long project, they'll do this, or a multi-year project, they'll do this every few months. And to clarify that design vision, to really make sure that the design is heading in the right direction overall, that it's not turning into a patchwork. And as you brought up, one thing that can be really helpful as well is to develop a style guide. So I love style guides. I think most products should have some kind of style guide, and they can help you get by with less documentation, and they can help you avoid kind of inconsistencies in your documentation. I would make the comment though that style guides, powerful tool, but they don't replace the need to create an upfront design. They don't replace the need to really think about how different screens, different interactions are going to be used. Because unless your product or your website is something that's very similar to what's been designed before. Okay, if you're just trying to basically reskin something, you can create a style guide that shows the new skin. If you're trying to actually create something that's going to work differently, create a new application or an application redesign, you need to start by thinking about the tasks, thinking about how the redesigning screens that will support the key tasks, and your style guide is going to be done by seeing what the patterns are between screens and formalizing those patterns. Okay, so a style guide doesn't replace design work unless you're doing relatively superficial kind of project. So, to summarize, cohesive design vision, it's one of the most difficult challenges of Agile to solve. And you need to find time in the schedule somewhere for the designer to think about those big picture issues in a holistic way, and not just be thinking about one user story at a time, or one epic at a time, or one 3-week sprint at a time. Okay. Any ideas for how to make this happen? How to get more cohesiveness and consistency in products or websites? Sorry?
User experience design done up front.
Yeah, upfront design. Yeah, the parallel sprint approach you found is parallel track approach you found is really valuable. Yeah. I think just the sense I'm getting from this room is that things have really changed, and the UX community and the Agile community have kind of figured out a lot of things in the past 5 years or so. A lot of the really unhappiness that was there a few years ago, not getting a sense that it's really pervasive now. So let's go on to the third challenge, getting user feedback. So this is also high up there on the list of complaints that designers have about Agile. And it's partly because of the compressed timeframes, and it's partly also because Agile tends to emphasize customer opinions rather than user performance. Okay? And UX designers, user-centered design culture puts an emphasis on measuring user performance and valuing user performance, and we kind of believe that customer satisfaction will follow if you can use it, and you can use it well. So we make a distinction between the culture and between the customer and the user that the Agile world often doesn't really distinguish. So probably the best known method for getting user feedback is this kind of thing. It's a usability test. The idea is that it's pretty simple. You take an early build or a prototype, and you ask someone to do a very specific, very realistic task with it. You see what issues they run into. And it's really common to find that even if your design has gone through many hours of team reviews, and you've surfaced it, you've got it out to the team, you've been talking with them, everybody thinks it's just great, or no, everybody thinks it's just great, except for this one issue over here that people talk about for hours. And then you put it in front of a user, and they don't give a damn about this thing that they've been talking about for 10 hours. What it is this other, like, totally in-your-face thing. It's like, oh my God, they can't do that, And you can relate to, okay. And they run into problems that nobody anticipated, okay. And it really kind of focuses you. So people who've done usability testing generally want to do more of it, and they're always like, well, why can't I get it into my schedule? Why can't I get it into my schedule? And ideally, you want to do usability tests before you ship, and, well, of course you want to do it before you ship, and ideally before you fully invest in coding and testing. Okay, you want to fix your code while it's still cheap to fix. So, usability testing, not the only form of user feedback that's important or that's useful, but it's the one that people usually have the most appetite for. But it's also something that a lot of teams want to do, but can't seem to make it happen, okay? And it's a challenge with any methodology. With Agile, though, there's also the challenge of trying to get it at the right time, because you're dealing with these really narrow windows. So there's a few ways that we can look at to try to make that happen. So sometimes teams don't test because they think it's hard to do. More often, though, they don't test because it just never seems to be the right time. Okay, so solution basically is just try to force yourself to do it. Especially with enterprise software, it's like, okay, lining up features is going to be really hard. And you have to go through account managers, and you have to find times that are, great times for those users, and you only get to talk to them once because they don't have a lot of time to spend doing that kind of thing. So just a thought, one thing that I found works is, even at the beginning of your design process, before you're ready, like well in advance of when you're ready, just try to identify who those people are. Like, figure out who exactly you're going to be talking to, and just message them, say, this is what we want to, this is the kind of thing we want to show you, sometime in the next month or two. We don't know exactly when, but can we call you up on short notice? And then when you're ready to put something in front of them, you've got a phone number, you've got a person to call, they're ready to hear from you, and you can call them up and figure out something to say. Yeah.
So are you experiencing with Agile methodologies that this kind of testing is not available? Like, if people are more resistant to it, or like don't want to do it, or what? Because I'm kind of confused, because if I were to make a waterfall project and it was a year long, based on the industry standard, well, 6 months in, all you would have done is planning, and so there wouldn't be anything for you to share with the customer anyways.
Mm-hmm.
So isn't Agile giving more opportunities to actually do user sort of feedback testing and whatnot? So I'm confused why it's a problem. I think it's a benefit. So
Yeah.
what's
I have a comment on that.
Sure,
Yes,
but-
please. Yeah.
If you have a deadline that's always fast approaching and you have a huge thing to build, you're just going from feature to feature without really allocating enough time to even think about extensive user testing. So there's, you send out questions to customers, to existing users, to validate some assumptions, but by the time you've done one feature, you're on to the next, and it's back to back.
Yeah.
But
At least in my experience.
That's poor planning versus a problem that iterative development.
Right, but I mean, as I'm saying, this is my experience.
sure. So I'm just.
It's a lot of people's
That's someone's
experience,
back
yeah.
job of planning, not
Right.
the inherent to the process, right?
Well, maybe some
Yeah.
skills.
Yeah, it's and Agile is supposed to be more a process that gets you more feedback more often. That's the theory behind it. But it's true in practice, and that's definitely not a unique experience. In the case study, what you see over and over again is it's really hard to fit in usability testing. Yeah. I'm not sure I can explain why, but yes, back.
To also answer the question if customers actually like to be involved, we do it every 2 weeks, and they're stoked. Like, the first one is a little bit weird since they get something half done, but once they get it, it's amazing, and we actually validate stuff before it gets built. Just do a prototype, and we validate these iterations if you so want the mock-ups.
Yeah.
So we don't even start building anything before we don't have any feedback if it's the right thing or not. So.
Yeah. Okay, you've managed to get it into your process and get a rhythm. That's great. Yeah.
I also think that within Agile you have retrospective, right?
Yes. Yes.
So you can violate all the principles and you just go without testing, right? And you ship it right. And next version you're gonna see what's going on, and then you have retrospection and say, you know what, maybe we should have done this. So incorporate in your process. So it's nothing bad within Agile. It's just like about, as the gentleman said, not applying the principles of Agile.
Yeah. It's maybe an adjustment. It's maybe a matter of it seems more difficult in Agile because people haven't had as much practice in it and have gotten used to the rhythms of Agile. Possibly. Yes.
But I also find that doing that sort of test with the users and doing it well requires a lot of work up front. For instance, what assumption are we trying to validate through the test? How are we structuring the test so we get that assumption answered without throwing bias into it? There's all that type of work that needs to be done up front. By the time you're done it, your development team is somewhere else and you have to have this merge then happen to bring in that feedback.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Have you ever tried parallel stream, meaning you have a designer team that has sprints, and nothing gets implemented by the parallel development team until it's being confirmed or approved. You know what I mean? You separate the two.
Yeah.
The problem is you're trying to, okay, you got to implement something, and that is it, and then you can't go back and change it. But if you have two different streams, the story for actual implementation is to go across until you do it. The design is sussed out to Agile.
announced that or tried that?
There are some companies where, the designer's given a user story to design something. The designer's given a task user to design something, and the acceptance criteria actually will say, this design work isn't done until it's been tested, and so until the users have gotten it to work. The user. Yeah.
I have a couple questions. One was just about this. Have you ever done where instead of just lining up users, you actually schedule the users as well?
Sorry, I was talking to Peter Hughes, if anybody knows who that is, and he was talking about what actually Meetup does.
Yeah.
And they just constantly schedule
Yes.
user testing. It's just always on the calendar. You have to prepare the test, and you better do it.
Yeah, that's exactly what I think we read the same book. So in the Lean UX book, which came out a couple years ago, one of the companies that's profiled is Meetup. We all use Meetup, and they have they bring in people. I think they started off with bringing in 3 users once a week, or 3 users once a week is kind of the practice that's suggested by the Lean UX book. I think Meetup's up to like more than that. I think they're bringing people like every day or something. So yes, bringing people in. And what the Lean UX book suggests is to outsource the recruitment of users, because that's the hard part. It's really hard to design and get your design team working on something, and also be dealing with just the logistics of getting people into the office or on a WebEx session or whatever. So they suggest outsourcing that, and that's one of those things that can kind of just make it happen. And they find that it's really useful just for the team to know that, feedback is only a few days away at any given time. So instead of having to just, okay, let's not spend an hour talking about this thing and arguing about this thing. Let's see what our customers think, or let's see what our users think. And having a regular schedule can help a lot with that. I must admit, I've never been in a project where I've managed to get that kind of thing going, but I hope to sometime. It sounds like a really great idea. Yeah.
I'm curious how many it should be okay to have that feature in front of the customer before they go to sprint, because still it should be half baked, right? So
yeah.
How do you really get the user input before they go to sprint? When we
Yeah. What my experience has been with existing customers, when you've got a product that customers that people use, is that people want to. People are like falling over themselves to get a session with you, and they get pissed off if you cancel it. Existing customers want to give you feedback, especially if it's something that they use all the time. Okay. If it's a website that they use sometimes, you usually have to pay people to come to a feedback session. Existing customers usually they're very, very eager to do that. The account managers sometimes can be a little bit more reluctant about it, so you have to kind of form a relationship with the account managers. You have to have some credibility that you're organizing. You have to set expectations. What we're going to be showing is rough. What we're going to be showing is just a mock-up, or it's just an idea. I try to not use the term usability test, especially with the existing customers, because then you have to backtrack and you have to say we're testing our ideas, we're not testing you. Okay. Usually, what I try to say is we want some feedback on some things that are coming down the pipe, so that you like what comes down the pipe. That's you could do either way. Let's see if I've got, where's my slide there? The best kind of golden time for usability testing is between that time where you just kind of get the design out to the rest of your team. Usually I always want to have the team look at it first. Then they can find things like feasibility problems. They can find things that are really obvious. So between that first walkthrough and when you hand it off to developers, that's kind of the golden time for usability testing. But this is also a good time, okay? Especially if you're dealing with something that needs, that's highly interactive, that needs to be, doesn't work well on paper. Okay? Does that make sense? Or, depending on how much you're willing to change, you can probably find feedback that you want to act on just about any time in the process. And you can also do things like you can test your previous version of your product and see how people use that. You can test your competitors' products. Okay? You can test your ideas. You can test your test your user stories. Test your assumptions about what people are doing. If you think you don't have enough to show people to make it worth their while, sorry, I don't have half an hour's worth of stuff to show you. Keep a running log as you go through this of questions for users. If you do that, you'll have questions for users. You'll use that time. Does that answer your question? Yeah? Yeah, okay. Anything else? Okay, so skipped over a bit. I want to talk about a few more options. So 3 users every Thursday is, I'd say, a really great practice if you can get that going. There are a few other options that I really like for getting really quick, easy to schedule feedback. And this has just become really popular or really available and good in the past few years. So one of them is usertesting.com and the other one is 5secondtest.com. Usertesting.com is basically you can get people to go through a fairly complex task. 5-second test is just basically, one of the classic tests with that is, what can people figure out your website is about in 5 seconds of looking at it, that kind of thing. And I've used both of these, and I think they're really worth considering. Usertesting.com is rather expensive. It's like $50 or $60 US per test, but it's like addictive, because you get feedback really, really quickly just in a matter of hours. Okay, and you get a video, and you can think about it, and it's enough to change your perspective. So the main drawbacks of these online services are that you're not sitting beside a user, you're not interacting with the user in real time, okay? And so it's hard to kind of understand why people are having a problem. The other issue is that you can't get users with very specific backgrounds. So if you're looking to, you're designing software for school nurses, and you can't ask these people to go find school nurses for you. You're going to have to find school nurses yourself. And another quick way to get feedback, if you don't need domain expertise, you go down to the coffee shop and you say, okay, you're at Starbucks. Would you like a $5 Starbucks gift card to take a look at my website? Okay, can I offer you something for 5 minutes of your time? Much better than nothing. And enough feedback to actually, for some applications, to get you past some impasses and improve your product. You got to remember that the point of getting feedback is improvement, not perfection. Okay? It's the perfectionism, I think, that makes us not do things. Okay, as we've looked at this, one more comment on this is that you'll need some process to take that input from people, to take that feedback from users, and act on it, to actually implement some recommended changes. So one of the companies that was profiled, one of the case studies that I read, TechSmith, that's a company. They have 2 developers just to fix actionable items from user studies. Okay, so they do their user testing, and instead of saying, oh gosh, we can't do anything about this because we've got all this other stuff, you've got people dedicated to do it. It's kind of like a tiger team for dealing with those action items. And that brings us to the next issue, which is change management and communication. Okay. Anything before we move on? Anything about user feedback? Success stories? You've heard some?
I think you're going to comment on it in change management because you just alluded to it there at the end about feedback, so I'll take over.
Yeah, I'll try to. So this is the last challenge that we're going to look at today. Absolutely not an Agile problem. This is a problem with every methodology and pretty much every project. Originally this talk was supposed to be just about change management, And one of the reasons I chose to refocus it is that I realized that I was going to come up here and talk about how designers like to change things, and that everybody would hate me, and it would just bring back everyone's worst memories of their worst moments in projects of things changing. So there's a lot of gotchas here, and I'm going to try to help. It's very messy. Anybody recognize this picture? You seen this before?
Is that the one where they change the side that they're driving?
Yes, exactly. So this is Sweden in 1967, one day in 1967, okay? They changed from left-hand drive to right-hand drive. And so Sweden's transportation system goes back 280 years, where with the information that was available at the time, that left-hand drive would be better, okay? And by the mid-20th century, Sweden's neighboring countries were all right-hand drive, and cars were designed for right-hand drive, and there were head-on collisions because of the way cars were designed. And there was enough pain that the government said, okay, we're gonna go ahead and make this switch. And despite this picture, it actually went well. It was considered a success. A lot of preparation, a lot of communication, obviously, went into that. And the accident rate actually went down. Went down for a while, and then went back to normal eventually. Yeah, that's kind of a phenomenon. Is that everybody's really careful for a few days, and then they think everything's back to normal, so they stop paying attention, and then the accident rate goes back up. But they did manage to reduce kind of permanently the head-on collision problem. So this picture, yes, comes to mind when we're thinking about the design change at its worst. So, but there are some things that sometimes make sense to change. Okay, no matter how far along you are in, or I would say, but pretty far along in a project, there are things that often make sense to change. Feedback from user testing, that's often a high priority for a lot of customers, for a lot of organizations. And sometimes it's, you realize you cannot not fix this, okay? But there's a few others that, we don't really kind of think so much as being changes, but often end up being just really hard to get accepted. So consistency issues, places where you've got one sign saying one thing and another sign, another part of the product saying do something else. Consistency is really hard. In the film industry, they have you've seen those websites where it's like someone's wearing a green sweater, and then halfway through the scene they're wearing a white sweater, and the reason that doesn't happen more often is that it's somebody's job. Like somebody is really dedicated to fixing consistency stuff. And consistency is inconsistency is going to happen unless you fix it, unless you've got some way of dealing with inconsistency. Okay. Specs are not perfect, so you're going to have cases that aren't specified enough. Okay. And then there's some things that really you should change because optimizing them really should be so easy. Something like text strings, often. Sometimes not, but often text strings are really easy. Some things you need to change because you can't anticipate how to do it right until it's actually coded. So progress feedback is a good example of that. You should have a certain type of progress indicator if something's going to be completed in a few seconds, and if it's going to take more than that, you should have a different indicator. And you don't know what's going to be the long operation until you code it. Other things that are really easy to fix, things like defaults. Have something selected by default instead of unselected. And a big source of change requests actually comes from developers, in my experience. They think they were able to do something, you thought you could integrate this third-party control, and it turns out to be just a whole lot of pain to do that. You go back to the designer and you say, can we change this? Okay? So these are the kinds of things that, you know, I can come up with this big list of things that actually often make sense to change late in the process. And what I'm hoping to do is just, you know, have this kind of thing go through in some kind of repeatable and agreeable and smooth way. And it is a challenge in a lot of projects. Does this resonate? Anybody not have change management pain?
I'm curious, what you're talking about there, is it sounds like to me that you're suggesting that maybe there's just some team norms that we all agree, no matter what, we'll do spelling mistakes. Like we'll just agree ahead of time. It's not a product management decision.
Yeah.
But I can see that.
I'm actually not saying that we should agree on this kind of thing ahead of time. I think that changes should be dealt with on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah,
So that everything and anything should be valued on its return on investment for effort, right?
That is. I agree. And what I find is that's in my experience, that's not always how it's been. So, so in a change design process, what you're talking about is how do you choose between change requests and the other things you've done. What I've seen, and maybe you can tell me whether this is just what I've seen, is that there's a point in the project where you say, okay, we can't do any more change requests. What we're just going to do is bug fixes. Anyone work like that, or in projects like that, where people just say no change requests? And I think that's actually pretty common, is that we have a bias against doing change requests, okay? And maybe it would make more sense to look at things and to say, does it make more business sense to change this, to implement this change, or to do this bug fix? That's what I would throw out there. Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we're in agreement. Yeah. So, so any organization, in order to deal with this, I think many organizations struggle with change because they haven't really thought through this stuff. So anticipate that there's going to be requests for change. And I would really recommend that having someone be designated to make the call on whether to accept a proposed design change. Nothing worse than being a designer saying, hey, can we do this? And no one decides. Okay, or to be the person who comes in with usability testing results saying, hey, we've got these issues, and there's nobody to say, yeah, we should fix this stuff. Okay, often just things don't get done because there's no one designated to do it. Okay, so just some thoughts on the process. And whatever you do in the process is you need to make sure that communication happens. So this is probably the biggest pain point of change is uncommunicated change, or a change where people don't know what's new. So you have to know at all times what you're planning to build, and you also need to know what's changed between the last time you heard and what the current decision is. Okay, and that requires some kind of content management from the point of view of your design deliverables and your records. So how do we go about communicating change? So let's go through just a scenario. This is just, I'm just going to put out some, a template of that I've adapted from a talk that I gave to UX design group about how you might go about dealing with a change request. I'm a big fan of formality when it comes to change management. I think more formality is definitely better because it's just, you need it. You probably need it more than you realize. When you don't have controlled change, it just makes everyone unhappy. So you're going to have some design process, and everybody looks at that, and at some point will say, okay, this is what we're building. Your design is accepted. It's going to be, part of the user story. It's going to be built. And the next morning or so, somebody will find a problem with it. Okay, it could be the designer. More often, it's someone else. that realizes that something's underspecified, something doesn't make sense, something's not feasible, something doesn't work for some reason or other. So change request is going to be made, and let's go through it step by step. So what I like is a formal process for making a change request. So here, for example, is the designer has said that a certain option should be off by default. Usability testing is finding that people are not finding the feature because it's off by default. What I like to have happen is whoever's requesting the change brings it up with the designer first, and the designer and the proposer will pre-screen the request. Okay. Sometimes the designer will come up with a better solution to the problem, or the designer will say that we talked about doing that or something. So you'll have that discussion, one-to-one discussion coming on first. Next thing is, as a designer, I would describe the proposed change in some way outside of the official UI specification. So once a UI spec is signed off, I kind of put it in a designated place that everybody can see it, and that's the official spec. And no matter how much sense it makes, that I think, to change that, I'm not going to change that until there's this process that happens. So I'm going to describe the change outside of the spec and send it in an email or notice to this designated group, which is sometimes known as a change control board, okay, in a spec or a ticket. So in this change request, I'll often make a copy of my design spec and highlight in red or red with asterisks or red circles or something what I'm proposing to change. Okay, so the people who are reviewing this change can see exactly what I'm proposing will change. And then you'll need some process to actually make a go or no-go decision on this. You can have it be, for really small no-brainer decisions, you can say, okay, this is what I'm going to do unless you object by a certain time, or you could do it by email or do it by meeting. It shouldn't be a big onerous process, but it should be a repeatable process. And I think it's one thing that I would one thing I recommend is to really focus on this future risk and benefit. It makes sense, but human nature is to actually focus on the past. Human nature is to talk about whose fault the change is, or to talk about, okay, well, sorry, I couldn't have anticipated that this was going to need to change, it's not my fault. I'm sorry. I talk about issues in the past. But what we need to decide in order to choose to accept or reject a change is really a simple question: will the company make more money if I make this change or not? And then, I'm a big fan of having the product owner make a go or no-go call in consultation with everyone who's accepted. It can be really political. Change can be really political, especially later in the process. Okay, and especially if people are really sick of something changing. So you want to get this off the designer's responsibility. The designer's just the messenger. And make sure that it's the product owner saying, this is what we're going to do, as opposed to having the designer saying, please, please, please do this. Okay. So I would recommend that formality for, especially in big teams, especially in longer release cycles, and especially if you've got a product that needs something like translation or outsourcing, where you need that intensive communication. Or in a team where change has been there's a history of conflict over change in the past.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Why would you do the design before deciding whether or not you're going to do it?
Because you can't, because it's clear. I just find it clear to say, to copy paste your design spec, change one line in it, than to write up an email saying, okay, on this,
Well, why even your expertise is highly valued. I wouldn't want to waste your time doing something if I didn't need you to do it. So why even bring you in? Why not this issue comes up from testing, and the product owner says, hey, this is now worth something, this is an important feature enough, but now I'm going to bring in the designer and whatnot. And I hate the whole idea of a CCD, but the product owner in the end, makes the final decision. But why even bother you? Like, you've got another 100 other things that we know for sure you should be focusing on.
Yeah. I think for most changes, the changes that I've got in mind are really these like one-line change in the spec. Not very, very little effort from the designer. It's a lot more effort just to go through the whole, approvals and everything. That's what designers are afraid of. They're not afraid of, doing this. This takes 5 minutes. But, for things that do take, more time for the designer, if it takes more than, half an hour or something, then yeah, I would create a user story for that. And schedule that. Get a user story for the designer. Yeah, that's a good question. Okay, so where are we? So communicating change. So I've not touched the official spec at this point. Okay, the official spec is still what people remembered from it last. Once I've got that go ahead to make the change, I'm going to make a copy of my official spec, update the version number of the copy, or use version control. So the previous version of the official spec still has its old file name and is still in its old location. Oh no, I'm going to move that to an archive location. And I'm going to transfer the change that I've made into the official spec and highlight it. Okay? So let's see if this is, if that makes sense. So if this was the official, where are we? Okay, let's say this was the official spec until yesterday. Okay, I'm going to not change this file. I'm going to duplicate it and move the yesterday's version of the spec into an archive location and today's updated version of the spec into the canonical location. Okay, and I'm going to keep my red circles and my highlighting in here so people can see what's changed. Okay, so the official spec is going to always be in the same location. You go to this particular folder or this place in the CMS, you're always going to find the latest and greatest, and it's always going to tell you what the recent changes are. Is that clear? Yeah? Okay, so that's my, what I hope is a reasonable process. It's better than no process for change management. So we started off by saying, I'm just going to quickly summarize, that to accommodate user-centered design in Agile, you need to augment Agile and tweak it a bit. So I'd like to wrap up by summarizing what those changes are. Ideas to challenge. This is a cultural thing in some teams and some developers. An idea to challenge is that working software is the only measure of progress. Okay, what the 12 principles actually say that working software is the primary measure of progress, which some people take to an extreme. Okay, and they don't recognize the value of sketching and prototyping and designing, and research. And it's very important, and especially in a UX kind of intensive project, to know where you are in terms of, how much do we understand our users? How far along are we in design? How happy are our users with our design work? Okay. In our retrospectives, are we on track with to producing a good design? And another idea to challenge is that everybody on the team needs to work on the same user stories at the same time. Okay, that's kind of a no-brainer. And finally, that only customer opinions matter, not user opinions, when customers and users are different. Or there's also an assumption, I think, sometimes that customers and users are always the same. And then there's the things, finally, that people, designers do really appreciate about Agile. We like this idea, this orientation towards frequent customer feedback, and we can kind of tweak that into getting frequent user feedback. It's not that much of a stretch. I don't know anybody who doesn't think that retrospectives every 2 or 3 weeks are a great idea, and having that continuous learning and being able to experiment. And I think what designers probably appreciate the most about Agile is that stuff gets built. Okay, you're not just sitting in meetings forever and dealing with things that never get built. It's a big satisfaction for a designer to have things get built. So thank you for all of your participation today. I'm going to be putting these links up. I promise I will put up these links. These books in a comment on the meetup group, so you don't have to write things down. There are 2 books that I find really useful. One of them is, you can get it from Amazon very cheaply. This one is expensive, unfortunately. But this is, I found this really useful. Jakob Nielsen and Chris Nodder, based on 16 case studies from Agile, implementing UX in Agile. Really readable and really evidence-based. Lean UX is also a really great book. And on change management, the classic for that is a oldie but goodie called the Software Project Survival Guide, and most of that is also on the web. Okay? And any questions or further thoughts, feel free to tweet me, or any questions or further thoughts now? Yes?
Sorry, just one last question, I guess, for me.
Please, yeah.
If you only have a set amount of resources, we kind of talked about early and then later development. Thank you.
Yeah.
And so if you only have a set amount of resources, you're going to have to spend those somewhere. And so, you know, like, do we decide that we're always building something new and we're always working on something old, that it's better to spend more, you know, it seems like you're maybe advocating for a bit more time up front before, you know, rather than some Agile principles like just-in-time and collaboration that are very powerful in terms of producing, like, we know more later so we can build something better, and that's for the designer as much as it is for the developer. But, you know, like, for me, it's always trying to balance those 2 things of, like, how do I decide I want to spend more time working up front on this feature versus spend some time, you know, when I know more a little bit later on to make a feature better. And my struggle a lot has been with, I guess, you know, waiting, you know, saying like, okay, well, we don't have to get the design perfect up front. We're not getting anything perfect up front. We don't need to go to that nth degree. We just have to make it good enough, and then let's get more feedback. Like, we've done some user testing, we've done some stuff. I guess, is there any advice on how to balance those things? Because I know it's a problem that I imagine we all face, and if you're not facing it, I'd love to talk to you.
I'd have to look at exactly what it is. I think it's more of I don't know how to express it in guidelines. It's more something you have to look at the particulars of it. So obviously it depends, right? Yeah. I wish I had some guidelines for it. My inclination is to you kind of get a sense of, I should just ask the designer, you know, how much, you know, do you need to do up front, and, you know, what's safe for us to implement that we can put up as an experiment, and it's also a matter of how much it costs to implement it. So it's all those things you just have to into it. Yeah, I don't know the formula. Yeah.
So in the UX book,
Okay. So in the UX book, they pointed out that bringing developers into design process is a good, it's a very good thing. And in some companies, they do like dedicated UX team that does design and then just give it to developers to produce.
Yeah.
So what is your perspective on that?
Yeah. I'm a big fan of working with the developers. Not necessarily having the developers. Well, a couple answers to that is you want to have the designer take the lead in design. But first of all, you do need to consult with the developers on feasibility, so that you're working within the technical constraints, and you want to find out what those constraints are early on. So I always start projects asking what the constraints are, and developers are usually quite happy to tell you that, and then you come up with an idea that you think is possibly hard to implement, find out, kind of how hard is it. The other thought is that everybody had, people can come up, untrained people can come up with great ideas, and it's really, for most people, if they have a design idea that they think is really good, they get really unhappy if they have to sit on it and they don't have a chance to express it. So at the beginning of a project, you want to just be really open to opinions and get people to sketch, have those sessions where people can get their ideas out and have them be considered. Because if people don't feel that their design ideas are being considered, then they're going to be a lot less likely to accept your great design idea. Okay. So the designer really is a leader, but you don't want to think that you're the only one who comes up with good ideas. You don't want to have people think that you think you're the only one who comes up with good ideas. Yes, yes.
This is just an add-on to that
Yeah.
question. So in that environment, have you got any anecdotes possibly about integrating from a process standpoint the design aspect right into the Agile team? So, instead of being a designer that's working with an Agile team, almost like a designer embedded in an Agile team, and how you communicate the iterations of the design from both the artifact standpoint and just like on your Agile board, perhaps. Any thoughts on that?
So how to integrate, so in other words, how to work with designers who are, or design activities when it's done by non-specialists, when it's done by the developers?
No, just even with designers, how do you, or maybe you have some anecdotes as to how, or if you've seen where the designer's working in parallel, like you described, maybe ahead, but where the work is actually visible, say on your Agile board, and in doing that, how the artifacts are exposed to the whole Agile.
Okay, how to keep design visible.
Yeah.
Okay. Very concrete answer to that. I would, project I've been working on very recently, create a homepage in Google Docs for your design activities. Create a page in Google Docs which just links to other Google documents where you've got your task analysis. So it's like, okay, here's a place where you can find basically everything that's come through my head. Here's some context scenarios that are useful. Here's some notes about competitive analysis that I've done. Basically, do a very small write-up of the things that you've discovered, put them up there. And if you're using a prototyping tool or even a drawing tool, you can have a link there to stuff that's in progress. So if you're anywhere, if you're at the paper stage still, you can stick things up in your cubicle wall. If you're at the electronic stage, you can put a link to stuff that's in progress on your homepage. I think we all like visibility. You need to give the designer some time to cocoon. They need to kind of be able to put up something that they think works and is not total crap.